I am Augusta DeLomo, here with my colleague Brian Franklin. Today is October 28th, 2023, and we are in New York City, and we are interviewing Lorena Oropeza. Lorena, could you introduce yourself to us?
Sure. My name is Lorena Oropeza, and I am a professor of ethnic studies at the University of California, Berkeley. And this is a recent switch for me. Before that, it's been about 25 years in the history department at the University of California, Davis. And I'm a Cornell graduate. I graduated the diploma says January 1996, but I actually defended the dissertation and did all the hoops in August 1995.
Wow.
Yeah, and my dissertation advisor was LaFeber.
Wonderful. So let's start there. How did you meet Walt? Can you tell us about your first interaction with him?
Oh yeah, I can. So I was a journalist working for the Orlando Sentinel, and I knew I wanted to learn more about American history and learn more about the context about which I was writing. I didn't know enough as a journalist. I had a 4-year journalism degree, so I applied. I knew I was going to apply to Cornell, and it turned out the man who became my husband was also getting a PhD in Cornell. These are stories that run in parallel, no? Mm-hmm. And so at that point, I was reading some light, fluffy 1920s, really cool, I can't even remember the author, but it was a work of fiction, and waiting with cross-legged on the floor, because there was always this long line, so I just said, I'd written him a letter. He says, you should drop by my office hours next time you're in Ithaca. And so I just dropped by, and it was like I think it was the last time in my life I've had moments to read something really light and fluffy and silly, you know what I mean? So, because you walk in and the first thing he said, what are you going to write your dissertation about? And he was intense, and I didn't know what a dissertation was. So it was a learning curve, I guess is the best way to put it. But that was a question he kept coming back to until I had an answer. Yeah.
Can you talk us through maybe some of those big memorable milestones with him as an advisor while you were getting your PhD?
Yeah, because I went a different way than a lot of people. So I was, when I went to Cornell, I really hadn't taken any history classes, I think 2 maybe as an undergraduate. And I remember a friend of mine saying, Lorena, it was overwhelming, quite frankly, it was overwhelming. And being in a seminar with him and Shannon Smith, who you may not interview her, but Ann Foster, there was 3 of us, and there was Walt. So each of us had the side of this enormous table, and just the concepts going back and forth, even the Whig version of history, I didn't know everything was new to me. And my dear friend at the time said, who was getting a PhD in history, she said, you'll be fine, just learn how to pronounce historiography. Because I would just stumble on that word, it would make me so nervous. So it was, it was a strange new world. I guess there's no other way to say it. I liked it. I was someone who loved to read. I was someone who was really curious. It was a good place for me to be, but it took me a while to know that. And there's 2 things that you should know. One is that given my background was in journalism, not in history, and I spoke to this on a Schaefer panel in honor of him. He brought me to Ithaca the summer before, and essentially took a boot camp or a STEP program or a bridge program, just tailor-made for me. And it was a survey of American foreign relations with Doug Little, and then a survey of American history with Glenn Outschuler, who one was a visiting professor, and Glenn has taught at Cornell and been in administration and the dean roles for a long time. And also just these lists of, here's, 6 books on the Vietnam War, here's 7 books on the Progressive Era, I just read and read and read, and then I started, and it was still a strange new world. So one thing he would always ask me is that question, what's your dissertation about? And at Cornell, another class I took was, I think it was called The History of Hispanics in the United States. And I'm Mexican-American, I had never taken a course like that. I didn't know they existed, right? And it was whoa, this is really interesting. So then the questions became, well, could you write a history of LULAC, which is it's a Mexican-American version of the NAACP, the League of Latin American Citizens. And so I started noticing these questions were not about American foreign policy, which in my really kind of limited understanding was like the real thing, like that's real history. Instead, he wanted me to do, like, it seemed like I was getting the impression, are you pushing me to a side history? And it was 1982, 83, I think, by the time I got there. And so it's like, is that because you think I can't do the other one? And so I actually asked him once, and it really shocked him, because no, of course not. That's not the way his brain thinks, right? And it's not his attitude towards other people. And so he was really taken aback. I said, I'm sorry, but if you come from where I come from, I have to ask. I just needed to know. And so it turned out that the way to bring these two together was to look at the Vietnam War and look at the Chicano movement's protests to the Vietnam War, and that became my dissertation, and it became my first book. And then also, so there was a certain, the word might be accommodation, like a way to, how can we, help this person through? How can we take what her talent is and like nurture it? So another way he did that was like, okay, you're going to be my advisor, but I need an entire committee. So Latin American history with Tom Holloway made a lot of sense. The third person of the committee, it was like, I don't know. I didn't know. And so I ended up working with a wonderful woman, Deborah Castillo, and in Latin American literature. So I moved outside the history department. It was quite friendly, because there's some people in the department I just want to work with. So it was an attempt to really meet me where I was, and then pull me along. And I found out later from Mary Beth Norton that and you've heard it a lot if you attended any of the panels today, that there's a lot of like, oh my, this is a great man, and you're feeling like here. But when I went back post-PhD, or when I went back to defend my PhD, I went out for drinks with Mary Beth Norton, and she said, oh yeah, she goes, he looked at your applications, well, she can write. Like that was like, because it was a mystery, like why the hell am I here, right? So I could write, so that helped. That was important, so yeah.
I love that you brought up the writing, because we've heard from so many people how important writing was to him, and that was a point of emphasis in all of his students. And I'm curious what other once you had the dissertation topic and you were working on it, what were the kinds of things he was probing you to think about? How did he push you with your intellectual inquiry? What did he want you to think about? Even if it's not specific themes, but just how he pushed you to think.
Well, one thing is that he allowed me to pursue this topic, because no one had ever written about the topic at all. No one knew that there was a really sustained protest movement among Mexican Americans during this time period. Not just the Chicano movement, but the Chicano anti-war movement. So because I was a former journalist, he just had faith in my ability to go find people. He said, I don't think that this would be something I'd recommend to most people, but you're going to find people, and essentially I created my own archive through oral history interviews. So that was one way, is just like, go. Another way, I remember one time, now that I'm on the other side and I've had graduate students, in the dissertation, there was one chapter that was at least 70 pages long. And it's really what graduate students do, is pay homage to everything else that has been written before them, right? So it's 70 pages long, and you're not until page 10 that a Mexican American actually shows up. So I do remember him saying, like, concentrate on what you're writing. They have to be at the forefront. And feeling absolutely overwhelmed at that prospect, because at that point I was all the way in California. I did the dissertation long distance. And like him just like kind of talking me down and walking me through it. So there was just so I'm not sure, like the dissertation, it's really an individual endeavor. You're going to do it or not, right? There's a lot of people who are like ABDs for a reason. But I do think that the way he wrote is really something I've kept in mind for my own scholarship, and that I want it to be readily accessible to anyone. I'm not really into specialized language that can create a distance between any educated member of and I mean educated, like just would enjoy reading a book, right? My goal is really an undergraduate audience, although I hope to reach a larger audience, but that's kind of where I aim as far as the readership. Yeah.
Once you finish at Cornell, where do you go next?
This no longer happens, but I was hired at UC Davis with a single chapter written. So I gave a really good job talk. And so now you have to have the dissertation done and several publications in hand. And so then the onus was on me between February 95 and August 95 to write an entire dissertation, which I did. Yeah. And, then it was, my bet was like, I'm going to show up at Ithaca and then I'm going to be able to defend it and I'll have a PhD in hand. So, yeah, that was.
Wow. And so then you start at UC Davis and you start your career as faculty. How did you think about, well, as an intellectual, a teacher, a mentor, as you start doing that in your own work and what you drew on as you started this career?
So it's really interesting because I have never taught the courses that I TA'd for or took with him at Cornell. So I've never taught a straight ahead American Foreign Relations course. Instead, what I did, in fact, I was given my dissertation topic, I was hired to teach Chicano history. I had never taken taken that one course on Hispanic Americans, but I never, those are just like pulling from scratch. So it's not really the content that I gained from him, but it's really a standard of excellence and an ability to synthesize material and then make your way through it, right? To have a really clear set argument in any lecture, or to have at least a really clear outline. What points are you trying to get across? So the way that, in fact, the first time I taught Chicano history, this is again a newbie mistake, it was really hard. It was a big, fat, ugly class, and the students rebelled. They just rebelled. It's like, this is too hard. And they told me, they're not Cornell students, and by implication, I wasn't LaFeber, right? I mean, it was just like we were in a different place. So what I did though is I always held on to that. If you study something for 6 years, you're not going to lose it very easily. And I ended up teaching the standard survey course, like Civil War to the present. And my survey course always had two axes, and one is race, because it's an interest of mine, and the other is foreign policy or empire. And most of my scholarship has fallen in between these two. Like this intersection is the one that I find most compelling. Yeah.
When you're thinking about your work and Walt's work, what do you see as, where you're drawing things from as you move forward in the field, or how do you think that he shaped that access that you're talking about? His use of race was sort of subtle. So it was not a major theme until later in his work, and that's one of the things that came out in the conference. So, and then from there, my second book was on a Chicano movement figure who was I was interested in him because he was a man who was leading a movement. His name was Reyes Lopez Tierina. And so one way to, probably doesn't mean anything to you, but you know Cesar Chavez, no? Okay, the militant alternative to Cesar Chavez. And he led a movement, actually shot up a courthouse in an attempt to get the land that Spanish-speaking people in New Mexico and throughout the American Southwest had lost after 1848, after the U.S.-Mexico War. So this is like a race and foreign policy intersection, no? And it's my channel. The first people I interview are his first wife and eldest daughter. And what I uncover in that oral history interview is a terrific episode of abuse, just every kind of physical, sexual, emotional. It's a brutal story. And so did Walt LaFeber help me make my way through that particular gender dynamic? No, no. But did he teach me how to be a good historian and be ultra careful and how to build an argument, how to accrue evidence? So yeah, that's what I did. And then it took me a long time to put that book together, because if I wanted to write what I would have called the telenovela version of this history, right? Or just here's the dirt, you should hate him. And that's, honestly, some people are gonna come to that conclusion anyway, but I wanted to include, how do you meld the personal political? That became the question. And eventually I developed an argument that I think fits, that the way he treated his family is pretty much the way he treated the organization. It was a family organization, it was power accrued to him, and there's really limits in that sort of leadership. So, I think unlike a lot of people at the conference who are still on the foreign relations channel, I moved in another direction, but
just that standard of excellence and care that has always remained with me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You mentioned that, he doesn't come to talking about race more explicitly until later. Mm-hmm. Do you have any sense of what caused him to bring race more into his work later in life?
I think he just became more, the whole world moved, no? Really. So, and to a certain extent, putting together, participating in the anthology to honor him was really, for me and my co-author, Jim Siegmeyer, an exercise in investigation. Because it wasn't like I traded Christmas cards with him. You know what I mean? I did early in my career, and then there was kind of like a lull and a break. And so I was really interested in his attitudes towards race. And to me, he really has like he's a man of his generation, no? So a pre-civil rights or early civil rights understanding of race, which is like, I shouldn't be prejudiced. And he wasn't, right? He took a step beyond to make sure that, and I mentioned this in the talk I gave, or the little introduction to the article, is that like I noticed right away that when Yom Kippur came, there was always like an optional lecture. It wasn't mentioned, but there was always a way for Jewish students to like celebrate the high holidays without like missing class. So this is like a personal intervention, a personal recognition that things have, or Sayuri talked about, another colleague of mine, another fellow graduate student, when she's being interviewed right now, but that, when she was a young PhD without a job and a baby, and her husband had employment elsewhere, like all of a sudden he had the perfect translating job for her. So there's like this personal, and that's one way that he excelled, I think. I don't think that as much as he thought about American power across the globe and like systems of power, and as much as that central question intrigued him, I don't think he thought about racism in structural terms, right? So, and he may have come to a deeper understanding because race shows up more in his later work, just like it's literally mentioned more. He doesn't see it as a prime shaper of U.S. foreign relations. He sees markets and economic forces really as more important, but he won't discount it. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but there is an evolution there. Mm-hmm. And it's why, again and again in the book and in these discussions we've had, we mentioned the 1969 Willard Strait takeover, and then in our article we also mentioned the 1993 Day Hall takeover, both of which he considered horrific events. And my point is that power is power, and its power is this empire being projected abroad, but it's also in institutions like Cornell University or any institution of higher education. Institutions stick around because they do not change very easily, right? And you don't get ethnic studies, without these sort of interventions, which he just found beyond his parameters of what was acceptable behavior. Yeah.
We've talked to people as they've been going through the conference, have learned various things about him. Were his reactions to those two events things that you were aware of at the time, or later hearing about the way he perceived those? Okay.
That was everything I learned about his reaction to the events. He mentioned them in lecture. He mentioned like one undergraduate was, I'm assuming a white young man was on his way to Willard Strait Hall to support Black Power. And then I remember in lecture what LaFeber says, and then his mother drove up and said, Jeremy, get in the car. So it was like, just like broke that whole facade of I'm going to be a revolutionary. So I learned more about him in the October gathering, which was like when the authors got together to share our rough drafts. And I really understood the extent to which it was super important to him to affect policy. Like I knew it kind of, but I could see it. Like he like some of his students end up with really prestigious posts in the government, right? And he writes these books. The timing is important. So there's one, there was a letter he wrote to a friend where he says a Washington Post review it was Arthur Schlesinger, who was 1,000 Days, like Celebrate Kennedy Forever. he says, I think that Schlesinger's review killed the book in Washington, which means that he wanted the book to like live and thrive in Washington, right? So I thought that was really interesting, because it really speaks to the power, like, you know, we talk about the ivory tower and like, oh, that's very academic. It means it's a way of like saying like things that are disconnected. He was extremely connected. So, yeah.
And you're talking about here different kinds of ways that he saw his work living beyond the academy. And, you know, several participants have said that he would not have enjoyed being labeled as a scholar activist, but some people have said that that would be a label they would apply to him.
Yeah, it showed up in our article.
Yeah, and I'm curious, you know, for people who haven't had a chance to read the piece, how you think of him fitting that mold or not, or what you think being a public academic meant to him.
Yeah, so maybe public intellectual would have been fairer than scholar activist. And Jim and I, like, we co-wrote this. Scholar activist, that's Jim's term. He came up with a first draft, and it showed there, and I wanted to keep it. In October, we got a lot of pushback. And we got a lot of pushback because there was just this like activist means like you fiddle with the truth to get your point across, right? And he was so careful about like building his arguments and using evidence, not going beyond his arguments. And also like the goal is to push the agenda, not to like write good history. And so, and it's also not about activism is about right now, and it's not about the past. So on both these grounds, we got a lot of pushback, but we kept it. And we kept it because it was so clear that in both the Panama Canal book and in the Inevitable Revolutions and in their subsequent editions, he was really either trying to affect policy affect it, not effect it, like to change it, like have a sway it one way or the other, or lament that it had gone so bad, right? So, but the way his scholar activism showed, the piece argues, is really in how accessible his prose was, how he made these really complicated, the problem is that the United States is so powerful, even now, even though we talk about in decline, it's still so powerful in so many different places in the world. So right now, it's hard, I think, for most American senators to what exactly is going on in the United States? What role does the U.S. play? And depending on what part of the country, you hear different things. And in Central America, it's in fact in both places, it's like those people, there's something dismissive there, right? Those people, they've been killing each other since forever. Or those people, they've never been able to hold a stable government. Right? It's so to move beyond that easy dismissive, and that means a ton of work, which he did in Inevitable Revolutions, to showcase the history of these nations, how the United States has intersected with them, and over again, hence the title, made things worse. It was just an act of, it was an act of activism. It wasn't some esoteric meditation on something that didn't matter. It mattered a lot. And it really mattered to him. There's an essential decency in Walt LaFeber. It was really clear. And based upon what he wrote and based upon the tone of those books, this is post facto, the United Nations and other groups have called what was happening in Central America, and especially Guatemala, genocide, right? And he really wrote about the brutality of the killing. And it's just so clear that some people were worth something and some people weren't, right? And that to me, to expose, I guess the word I'm looking for is complicity. His work in my reading, and especially in the two books, was really about exposing American complicity with absolute horror and brutality. That's a far cry from talking about democracy, but the money goes to support militaries or paramilitaries that are, murder machines. Yeah.
Do you see his contributions, what you're describing is the way that he wanted anyone to be able to read this and approach this and understand these big systems. Do you see a similar contribution to the traditional historical profession or to the field of U.S. foreign relations, or do you see his contributions in those spaces as slightly different?
Well, so in comparison to people of his generation, there's a lot of great historians who are writing great books. And so he's among them, right? And I really think he's one of the premier historians of his generation, for sure. I think that if you look a lot at his, like so much of the glowing, or you get a group of people who knew about LaFeber, and it's like we start trading stories about, oh yeah, he just had like one little note card and he just looked like this for some like figure and then he put it down. By the time I was among his last graduate students, there was no note card. There was just, it's 15 minutes straight on. But the people were captivated, these undergraduates were captivated, and today at the conference I kept meeting people like, oh, I took his undergraduate class. I was an art history major, I was a theater major, but he was my favorite professor. So that ability to tell what happened and why and hold, that is like his teaching. I don't think anyone has ever come close. I really have never met a professor who's come close. And I know a lot of people give good lectures, but not sustained over a whole semester, right? So, and I think that his ability to teach is like, it's reflected in his scholarship. The printed word and his spoken word, they feed each other. And also, and I heard this from Anne Foster, that oftentimes when you're a historian, you just have all this information. Like it's just a barrage of like archival documents and trying to sort through it. So you say, and then all the different writing experts say like, writing is the process. You write through the process. And this is now hearsay because I didn't hear this directly. But Anne said that she heard from Walt that he would have the argument before he started. Oh my gosh, that's just such a clear way to write. I mean, if he could, so he saw things and could put them together, and his ability to do that and to do that over and over again, because the magnitude, the number of books that he wrote is really far beyond that of most historians, like double, triple, right? Quadruple sometimes. So, that's a skill set that is really unique to him. Yeah.
On the subject of his many, many books, I was very struck reading the volume of, he is traversing geographies, time periods, issues, people, basketball. What do you see as the intellectual themes that are kind of undergirding all of them? Well,
I mean, the reason he can do that is he has one thesis, right? That helps. So it helps that he's always focused on one question, and his one question is about American power. And like, how does it operate across the globe? It's like, okay, first it expands across the continent, and then it searches for markets. And that's incredibly simplistic. But if you have those pieces, then everything, it's like the skeleton, and everything hangs on it. And it can get refined, you can add race in it, you can look at different people, you can get different pushback, but it's like that central thesis it was in the New Empire. That's why it's the Territorial Expansion, Old Empire, this is a New Empire, and it keeps on going. So I think that's like part of his genius, is that he's not starting from scratch, right? He's never starting from scratch. But he also had the ability always to tell stories, and this came across, there was always like the revealing anecdote, the really revealing anecdote, so that, whether like how Woodrow Wilson wooed his second wife, or, like when the Mets win the World Series, or like things that capture a time or a spirit that just makes you, it's easy reading. It can be a lot, right? But it's fairly easy reading. It's not like you're going to be struggling through trying to figure out what is he trying to say here. He's going to say like, this was important for 4 reasons, boom, 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 right? So, yeah.
To circle back to your experience being advised by him, we've heard from other people that how much he loved teaching undergraduates, and you mentioned this about his teaching and that no one else was like him. I don't know anyone that was getting standing ovations for lectures. And I'm curious what you felt as a graduate student. Did you feel that really strong love for the undergraduates, and how that influenced, the mentorship that you felt as a graduate student?
I think he fundamentally respected undergraduates, and I think he was also, it was, so to understand his, and I'm not sure this was quite what you asked, but to understand how he taught graduate students versus undergraduates, that's really hard to disentangle from my own, I don't know what I'm doing here, it's really hard, I can't, So I had to get over that. And one thing I remember is the first long essay or paper that I wrote in graduate school was something on the Monroe Doctrine, because I knew I was interested in Latin America. I think I called it a national security blanket, because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. But it was like, I could summarize some books, I could figure out that much, and I think I had, at that point I called it a hook, but it was sort of an argument. But he gave it back to me, and I knew it wasn't right where it went like this, like I didn't even want it back. And then he gave me this like, what's wrong with you? Kind of this really quizzical, like, just snap out of it, lady. It's not that big of a deal. Like, it's solid, right? And so there were just times when I think he was like, and then there's another thing he did, and I thought that was kind. Like, so he would, when you had his undergraduate classes, he would always introduce the graduate students, right? And he made it sound like we were something, right? And it was just, there was a generosity of spirit, I think. And that might have been part of his fundamental decency, like his Midwestern politeness. And I also think that people, at least the best people who are that accomplished, it really is, they do that. They can do that. That just is something that they do, right? The most admirable people, yeah. Yeah.
Do you find that when you have graduate students now, and like, do you find that those are things that you remember and draw on as you're working with your graduate students now?
I've won like awards for my graduate mentorship, and it may be partly that, and actually in some of the thank yous that I received, I remember one, it's like to something about matching the highest standards of excellence, like the highest expectations. You don't give, but you're also willing to work with that person to get there. And to do both, I think a lot of professors say, forget it. Like, you're either like good enough to work with me, or I'm not gonna, you know what I mean? Right? Or a minimalist approach. So I think that, I'm not sure that, I ended up in a different field, pretty much. And I ended up teaching a lot of first-generation graduate students, or some first-gen undergraduates as well. And so it was a different group of people. But it's really, if I think of like how Walt LaFeber affected me, it's like, one is that because I had a PhD from him, like I had a whole new career. Thank you very much. I was ready for one. And two, it's just that like scholarship matters. Like excellence matters. Like there's something you don't compromise on, and those are the two. Yeah.
I've been very struck hearing both you and other people talk about this standard that you're talking about. People feel it. The excellence was the standard, but that he didn't believe in being cruel to get you there.
He could be a little spooky, though.
Spooky?
Oh, yeah. If you just met someone who goes, what's your dissertation about?
Oh, yeah.
And then I remember there was one young man who was had fallen behind he was a master's student from Germany, maybe. I can't remember his background exactly, but he said, if he had fallen behind, and he went to talk to Walt to say, I'm fallen behind. And I'm like, if I have to do everything you want me to do between now and whatever the due date is, I won't be able to sleep. And supposedly Walt said, don't sleep, right? And there were times when it was really clear that he was like, I don't know if he slept very much, this night owl. So, or there was just when he asked, although I've been on the other side, right? I've been with other exam committee members where they're asking questions and they're actually more spooky, yeah. So he considering his prestige, it wasn't something that got in the way most of the time. Mm-hmm. And then did anyone ever tell you about what happened when you walked out of the exam room?
No.
Oh my gosh, so it's hard to be grilled, like you're peppered with questions. This is the master's exam, right? Your comprehensive exams. And you've already written everything, and then you have to go talk about it. And then you get up and you're wiped, you're done. And it's a closed exam because it's the professors. And when I left his room, so I don't know if you remember Burt Reynolds, the movie star. He became famous because he was actually a famous actor. But he also posed nude for Cosmo. So he had Burt Reynolds' nude photograph from Cosmo, like the magazine spread, with Henry Kissinger's face instead of Burt Reynolds. And it's like, okay, I'm now in a new place. I don't know if he could, he probably had to remove it at some point, but that was it.
You've mentioned a couple of other fellow PhDs with you, and we've heard a little bit about the kind of community of undergraduates that got really interested in his courses. Could you talk a little bit about just the experience of being one of his graduate students with other graduate students and what you all exchanged and learned and talked about with each other as you went through?
Yeah, I mean, it was just nice. I mean, like Susan Brewer is one of the co-editors of this volume. I remember the first time I met Susan, I was a first-year graduate student. She was like a fourth year, or maybe a third year. I was like, oh my gosh, I will never be there. And she's just a wonderful human being. But there are people, like, when you go through a certain experience of a graduate education, like, whether you see them very often or not, like, you've shared something fundamental. And it's really interesting, since I sort of changed topics or emphases enough, people will often assume that I'm a student of a really well-known professor of Chicano history, Vicky Ruiz. So R-U-I-Z. And it's like, no, I'm not a Vicky Ruiz student, I'm a Walt LaFeber student. But then people know you as a Walt LaFeber student. Like, you have this, like, mark on you. So, yeah, we spent time thinking, like, I remember one time being in Olin saying, like, okay, I am in my 20s. By the time I am 40, like, if I get 40 more years of knowledge, maybe I'll be able to talk with the same sort of grace and fluency and knowledge that he has. Like, I have some time here. That was my only hope, yeah.
Well, I'm curious, as you moved fields and you moved into this new role and choosing to dive back into his scholarship, which has always stayed, in the diplomatic history field, like what you saw having taken that time and stepped outside the field, things that you saw with his work that you took away now, almost 2 different fields later. So one thing that's happened, like, I love Inevitable Revolutions. It was really, it's why I decided I wanted to work with him. But if you look at it from a Latin American side, it doesn't have enough, like, there's a question of agency, right? It's not there. And so that's an overstatement. It's there, but it's very subtle. There's not Spanish language sources. It's not an equal, it's really, he really is always interested in American power and what are the consequences of its projection abroad, not just for the people abroad, but also for people within the United States. So, that's one thing I noticed. And then I really was taken. I mean, I discovered this in writing the piece for the anthology in honor of him, is the extent to which he was, like, he didn't really necessarily respect or admire. He would tolerate, maybe is the best word, and I'm being hesitant only because my archival base is limited, right? But when it came to gender studies, when it came to women's history, when it came to like cultural studies or cultural critiques, it was like, well, like, this is, like, there's a quote that I included when I found it, I was like, okay, this explains it. Like, all these jazzy, gender-focused, new ways of doing it, they don't really explain what we need to really understand, which is how U.S. power operates. So it was like, wow. So I mean, it was kind of revelatory to me to understand, like, he really was on a single channel, and it was one that he used to explore many phenomenon, but he was absolutely committed to these central questions. I mean, at least that was my understanding of his work. Yeah. I remember reading that in your volume and thinking about, I wonder how he would have viewed the change that's happened in the field of diplomatic history, where there's, more and more scholars asking different kinds of questions.
Well, including, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. I met her in October, the woman who replaced him, but it's now even the field, it's not forget U.S. diplomatic history, forget history of American foreign relations, forget international history, forget transnational history. It's like the U.S. and the world. Right? That's just a different conception. And so, and it's a multipolar world. So, but if anyone would appreciate that things change over time, it's a historian. So I think, he would be extraordinarily polite and engaged with it. And I don't think he would move from his central premises. And the reason I say so, because in that piece, I also talk about the way he reviewed Kristen Hogginson's fighting for American manhood. He goes, an important, innovative, or something interpretation. He's not like, go, this is the wave of the future. He goes like, we need to consider this, which is like, it's perfect. It's perfect LaFeber, not even Walt, but like it's perfect LaFeber, that sort of modulated, careful tone. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have only a couple minutes left. Is there anything that I didn't ask, but you would have wanted me to ask before we wrap up?
No, but that's always a question that I end with.
I think I'll then do our last one on here. What would you want someone who's just got this sort of snippet to know about him? What do you want them to know about him?
I think he's a man who devoted his life to making the world a better place. I really do, and that may seem somewhat far removed from writing books, but everything he did was he really was a progressive historian. He really did believe that if you studied things, if you learned, you could make some good decisions, and we would all be better off.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.